Hi, I'm Momo from Bonobo Flow. Today we're going over fire safety for flow arts. First, we're gonna have to talk about a little bit of a disclaimer. Fire spinning is inherently dangerous. Even if you do it perfectly, there's no way to fully avoid all risks. So please read our safety disclaimer. Make sure you look up any local laws and ordinances related to open flames and only fire spin where you have permission to do so. Now that we got the safety disclaimer out of the way, we're gonna start with our 3 pillars of safety. The first fire safety tool that we're gonna use is a fire safety blanket. This is probably the most important tool we'll have in our safety arsenal. Fire safety blankets are used to put out props as well as people. We will go over how to put a prop out later in the video. Fire blankets are usually made of natural materials. They're usually called duvetines, although duvetines are a specific type of fire safety blanket. They're about 8 ounces thick, and then anything that's in the 10 to 12 ounce range is technically commando cloth. Our blankets are 32 ounces, so they don't even use chemicals, and they're also really nice since when you're rolling the prop into a ball, you won't feel the fire. There's also Nomex safety blankets now that are a synthetic material that are fire safe. They're a little bit more expensive, but they also work great. Our second pillar of fire safety is a fire spotter, which is also called a fire safety. This is just a person that's there watching you fire spin and making sure you, the audience, and the environment around you is safe. Generally, the protocol for a fire safety is to call out any body part of yours that caught on fire, and we want to be specific. So if you notice a knee catch on fire, you want to say knee instead of leg or elbow instead of arm. The fire safety is also making sure that nothing around you is catching fire and that your audience is safe. And so they'll be there standing with the fire safety blanket. If they notice you catch on fire, they can walk up to you with the fire safety blanket. And for instance, if your elbow catches, you can put it around the elbow to douse it. Most of the time, you'll be able to just swat at the fire, and that's how you'll be able to put it out. But the fire safety is there to make sure that you know what caught on fire. The third pillar of fire safety is a fire extinguisher. Although this might seem common sense, we also want to use this as our last line of defense. Fire extinguishers are not comfortable to be used on humans, regardless of the type that you are using. But obviously, if it's a larger danger or if something extreme happens, especially in the environment, we always want to have one of these in hand. The most common type of fire extinguisher is an ABC extinguisher. That's labeled in the USA, so that might change depending on where you're at. These are cheap, and you can find them everywhere. They have a chemical expellant, so it kind of can irritate your skin or your breathing, but they work on a lot of different kinds of fire. And the second type of extinguisher that you'll see commonly are BC extinguishers. These are carbon dioxide extinguishers. They're a lot less messy because there's no dry chemicals being sprayed out, but it can also cause some breathing issues if you're using them on a human for too long. One important caveat is the A in ABC stands for wood and paper. So if you're for some reason not following the rest of our guidelines and spinning near dry trees and brush, you would still need an ABC extinguisher to put those types of fires out. BC are just slightly more ideal if you're going to use them on a human. Our first line of defense is always using the fire safety blanket along with having our fire safety present. Now that we have our 3 safety pillars taken care of, we can talk about our environment. First and foremost, we want to make sure there's no obstacles and we're in a large open area. We want to make sure we're not near any trees, power lines, or string lights even. And we want to ensure that the wind isn't blowing into our face. If the wind is blowing into our face and we have a fire tool lit in front of us, it's going to splash back into our faces. And so there are 3 separate zones we want to set up wherever we fire spin. There's going to be the dip station, which is where we're going to keep our dip can and our fuel. The second station is going to be our spin-off area. That's where we're going to make sure that we get all of the excess fuel off of our props. The third area is where we're actually spinning fire. We want all 3 of these areas to be at least 20 feet apart. Next, we're going to talk about the different kinds of fuel. There are 2 main types of fuel. One being high combustion point fuels and then the other being low combustion point fuels. A low combustion point fuel ignites at a lower temperature, so it's more easy to light. That would be things like white gas or even isopar E, depending on what country you're from. These are usually hotter, brighter, and burn shorter. The next type of fuel is high ignition point fuels, and that would be our lamp oils, kerosene, paraffin. These are usually a more oily substance. I don't prefer them because they tend to make things slippery, especially the floor or your skin if it comes into contact. But they do burn at a much cooler temperature and they burn much longer. So it is an option. And remember, the best thing to do is to ask your local fire community what is standard to spin with. Everywhere in the world, they label the fuel in a lot of different ways. So kerosene might not mean the same thing from country to country, or even city to city, or brand to brand. So just ask people in your neighborhood that fire spin what the best choice to use is. Fuel should always be kept in its original container. When using a dip can to dip your props, you want to make sure it's a metal container. Anything that's glass can shatter if accidentally dropped, and anything that's plastic might melt from the fuel. And so we want to use a metal dip can, and we always want to use our original containers. The fuel always stays at the dip station, and we're always going to return the fuel from our dip can to its original container after we're done. Before dipping your prop, we want to make sure that all connections, ropes, quick links, collapsible staff parts, screws, everything is tightened and ready to go. We want to make sure our prop is safe before we're spinning fire with it. Next, we're going to dip our prop. And so once we open our fuel container, we're going to take our fuel and empty it into the dip can. You just need to put in as much as you need for your prop. If your prop needs to be dunked, you might have to put more fuel into the dip can. I like to use these little turkey basters. They're made of metal, and it lets me precisely fuel my props. And so we're gonna take our prop, this is a fire poi, and we're going to use our little turkey baster and just put it onto the wick. We don't want to get any fuel on any other part of the prop other than the wick. Once we're done with that, we want to make sure it's not excessively dripping. I like to do a kind of a little bit of a shake into the dip can, and then we can place it onto the ground and close our dip can and make sure our fuel container is closed. Now that we've moved our safety blanket and our fuel and our dip can away from where we're spinning off, we're just going to quickly get any excess fuel off of it. As you can see, there's nothing even dripping off of my poi right now, which is ideal. But we're doing this to ensure that there is no excess fuel before we start fire spinning. In some countries, they actually don't even have a spin-off area. They have like a prop drying area where they kind of just leave the props on the ground inside of a tray, and they let the prop kind of soak the fuel and let any excess fuel drip off so that you're not spraying any fuel anywhere. I find with white gas, because it evaporates pretty quickly, that we don't need to do this as much. We can just do a spin-off area. Those are just some local differences that you might find. And again, ask your local fire community what is standard where you're spinning. So to put out a fire prop after we've dipped it, we just, once it's lit, we want to also make sure that the prop is moving when it's lit so we don't get too much fire onto the tethers or onto our grip tape or any other part of the prop. And once we're done spinning, we just put our prop into the safety blanket and we're gonna wrap it and make sure we choke off any oxygen that could be coming to the prop. Here you can kind of pat it down and make sure that the fire gets put out before we open the blanket to check. And like I said, a thicker safety blanket is kind of nice so you don't feel the fire on your hands at this point. Another note is if you put out a freshly dipped fire prop, it's going to be a lot easier to catch your fire safety blanket on fire. And so we want to make sure that we're also putting it out as quickly as possible in order to avoid this. Next thing we want to talk about is clothing and hair. We want to make sure our clothing is made of natural materials. My whole outfit right now is made of cotton and linen. And so synthetic materials will melt when they burn, and that'll leave some nasty chemical burns on you. Although natural fibers can burn, you can most of the time just brush it off or have your fire safety put it out with the blanket, but it won't melt and cause any nasty chemical burns. You might want to do a small test on a small part of your clothing that isn't as visible, just to make sure that it's fire safe. And then for your hair, you might want to put it up in a bun for people that have longer hair or a ponytail to keep it out of your way. Be careful using hairspray because hairspray is flammable. So a lot of people in these situations like to use water right before they flow, and that'll keep your hair safe and in where you want it to be without also adding flammable chemicals to it. With clothing as well, we want to ensure that we're not using anything that's super loose or has fringe, because that type of clothing, regardless of material, is easily flammable and will ignite very quickly. We want to make sure at all times that not only are we sober while we fire spin, but our fire safety is sober. And anybody in the audience that is intoxicated and way too close to us is also a bit of a risk. And so we want to ensure that the fire safety is not only aware of what we're doing, but they also have some awareness of the audience around them and any potential safety issues while we're spinning fire. Now that we've gone through our full fire safety breakdown, I'm going to go over a quick recap on things we should have and things we should do. And so the first thing we need to make sure we have is a fire safety blanket. We're going to have a fire safety, also called a fire spotter, and we're going to have a fire extinguisher. Next, we want to make sure that we have safe props, that our clothing is fire safe, and that our hair is either put in a bun or ponytail, or we sprayed water on it, mostly for the people with long hair. Next is we want to ensure we have the right type of fuel and the right type of dip can. So for things that we should do, we need to make sure that our environment is clear of any obstacles and is safe. We need to set up our dip station, our spin-off area, and our fire spinning area. From there, we need to make sure we're dipping safely without getting any fuel on any other parts of the prop except the wick. And then from there, we will fire spin. And then we need to put out our prop and return all fuel to its original container once we're done spinning. Fire spinning is a beautiful art when we respect it. Looking cool is not worth being risky. Thanks so much, you guys. I hope that this was helpful. Please like, subscribe, and follow us on social media so we can stay connected.